Shortly after my conversion, which I have detailed in a previous video, I was one day called to preach a sermon in my local church at home. The call came at a time when it was still convenient to sit on the fence concerning my newfound religious convictions. Previous to my conversion, there was that secret craving for fame that is common to the unregenerate heart. I had fully intended to be popular, and for other reasons than religion. In fact, I felt that there was stigma attached to being religious, especially for a youth my age and my ambitious promise. Being a scrupulous Christian would necessarily make me appear straight-laced and expose me to the unfriendly ridicule of scornful peers. So there was this conflict between my better impulses and my innate desire for human approbation. Christianity seemed to be dead weight to my surging force of influence. I felt I should somehow be allowed to be a Christian secretly. Perhaps this is some of what Nicodemus went through in his mind for him to choose to steal into Jesus' presence at night. Just past the straight gate that leads to the narrow way, I encountered this cross. And the offense of the cross has not ceased. I was already beginning to experience it as an instrument of shame. But I was yet to know by experience that the cross of Christ was not only an instrument of shame, but also of torture. And Christ endured both. He bids us carry it daily and follow him. So this call to preach came to me at this time when I decided to be a Christian in hiding. I had no choice but to accept it if I retained God's approval. So I prepared a sermon on the subject of the investigative judgment. The preparation was diligent and prayerful. While I had a deep burden for the salvation of souls, I intended to remain rational instead of overly rein up consciences with a sense of guilt. This was intended to not cut myself out as being very spiritual. There seems to be a resistance in our nature towards being peculiar. During the presentation, however, I received help from God. In fact, I had more help than I was initially willing to make use of. There was an obvious force and solemnity in every word and song. I was myself keenly moved. It seemed to me that I was not in full control of what I was saying. This had never happened to me. My heart burned within me, my sinful resistance went away, and the audience was moved to tears. One of the people who listened with teary eyes was a very young gentleman sitting on the front row to my left. I saw that he was struck with conviction. His real name was Victor Ochieng, my real brother, born after myself. He was also called Oyo, from the fact that he was born on the roadside to the hospital. Perhaps it also pointed to the closing of his life's journey on the roadside to glory. These sermons became frequent, and I came to the point where I made altar calls, and the congregation moved as one man to the front for prayers. The manifestation of grace and conviction in these moments made them rare. For Victor, the die was cast. His decision for life was made. And I received a biological brother to the spiritual loneliness to which I had cut out myself by my conversion. Our hearts were uniquely knit together. Though I was quite in advance of him in age and in class, we shared a lot. We could pray together and share experiences together. Whenever we were both at home, we made a point to meet in church at least 2 evenings a week. The meetings in church were in company with 2 other similarly minded brothers. In these meetings, we studied together, shared experiences, and prayed together. This was our way of staying our feet in the narrow way. Whenever we both came home from school, the first thing we did was to have time aside for the 2 of us. In these very private and intense interviews, we would interrogate how each of us dealt with challenges that would assail our faith, mutually give counsel, and go upon our knees to pray. We prayed to be kept in the narrow way. Our faith was simple and our conscience delicate. Concerning home responsibilities, Victor was hardworking, sensitive, kind. Spiritually, he always sought every opportunity to win a soul to Christ. He became a spiritual leader in his school, and many of the students who came under his influence were led to the truth. Then one day when we were on our way to church for one of the programs that we did 2 evenings a week, He told me that he had made a disturbing discovery and he was wondering if he should tell the parents. He had discovered a swelling on a private area of his body. The mere fact that he could be undergoing psychological and physical pain pierced my heart keenly. At this point in my life, I don't think there was anything under this sun that could have unsettled my peace as something that hurt him. I told him that we should let the parents know about it so that we can find a way forward. We then proceeded to church with this burden in our hearts, and we prayed. In the hospital, the physician prescribed some medications which he expected would shrink the swelling in a short time. But the more Victor took them, the more the swelling increased. He was then booked for a surgery. That was a lot for me to endure. I know that people go through surgeries, but it would seem that my heart had never been before closely tried by the suffering of a close and dear one. I think my heart was peculiarly sensitive to anything that bothered Victor because of the triple bond of blood, friendship, and faith. I shared in his life as I think no one else could. My parents deeply loved Victor, but there was a sphere of Victor's life into which they could not penetrate. Seeing matters with their hearts, as only a parent can, they used to sympathize with me during Victor's later sufferings than they sympathized with themselves. It soon dawned on me that surgery was far from being the worst on Victor's part that we would have to go through. When God chooses to try the human heart, He does try every fiber in it. I soon received news while in school that Victor was experiencing real abdominal pains not long after the surgery while he was in school. At this time, Victor was in Form 3 and I was in the early part of my 4th year in the university. I will stop short of describing how I felt, but I would mention that I began to immediately do a most vigorous research on the best practices in cancer. Soon I received word that the results from the biopsy sample were ready too. There were hints in the language that the results were not likely to be what we would admire. As a matter of emergency, I traveled to meet Victor at the place where we were to officially receive the news of his having cancer. And we did. So I met Victor, friendly and sensitive as ever. We both knew what the matters were, and I watched his young face diligently, wondering what could be going on in his mind. Every moment we entertained the hope that the worst had been past. We didn't know that this day was really the beginning of one of the deepest physical and emotional pains that we would be invited to endure. In Victor's later sufferings, my dad mournfully expressed that he would rather change places with him. He wished he would be given the privilege to suffer in his place. My mother is naturally very vulnerable when it comes to her children. She is very rich in the natural affection of a mother. The circumstances of Victor's journey acutely traumatized her. But in spite of this, both parents manifested more sympathy for me than for themselves in Victor's case. They seemed to know as only a parent can know. They felt I was more affected. My parents accepted to lend me the privilege to stay with and serve Victor in his critical sickness. We made this request together with him. So I was to be a student as well as be his nurse. At this time, I'd been doing my assignment in regard to the study of the pathology of cancer. I researched on best practices and worst practices. I studied diligently what to expect from most of the conventional treatments of cancer, including their physiological effects. So I lived with Victor. We decided that we would do whatever was possible to preclude the radical measures in his treatment. That meant that we needed to invest every effort in rational therapy so that the body would naturally heal itself, having been subjected to the right conditions. We desperately depended on God to make this happen because we had reason to believe that this was His plan for healing. We also thought it would glorify God to work miraculously in Victor's case because he was a scrupulous Christian and young as he was, he had embraced the principles of healthful living. We decidedly thought that cancer was particularly an intruder in his case. How did it even happen? With his lifestyle and youthful promise. And you remember what we said about the offense of the cross? Even Jesus' closest relatives thought he was beside himself because he was peculiar. The decision to be strictly pious at a young age is not necessarily fashionable. It sets one apart in ways that may be disagreeable to our nature. So in many ways, God would prove a point by healing him. At least so we thought. From the first day, we decided to pray together. That time, Victor was not really weak physically, but he had abdominal pains, a swelling that kept increasing in size, and a foul-smelling discharge. We sought the most solitary places in the university. We would first go separately upon our knees before coming to pray together. We labored long and earnestly in prayer. We presented the strongest arguments we could possibly command before God. But the strongest argument of them was our helplessness and our mutual pain and need. The heart knows best. I don't doubt that those prayers are eternally lodged in the heart of infinite love, and someday we will understand why. We asked questions and cried and wept. When we met to pray together, Victor told me, God has heard us. I could feel it without a doubt. And I know he will heal me. Looking back, I know he was right. But he only understood the matter as a human can. God will wipe away his tears. Not with a handkerchief, but with a reason for these mysterious and seemingly dark providences. I also believed as Victor did, only more relentlessly. I think I naturally have a large force of will. I did not relent on the belief that God would heal Victor to the very last. So we began to labor. His diet was perfect to our best judgment at the time. We chose the best fruits and vegetables that are recommended for cancer, and he tasted nothing completely that we thought could predispose him. Though in retrospect, of course, I've taken issue with the fact that our food sources were not particularly organic and our water source was not entirely blameless, especially because of the chemicals for treatment. We made sure he breathed fresh air, did moderate exercise, and slept on time. I also gave other rational attentions as the situation required. This was to at a minimum arrest the onward march of the tumor and initiate remission. And thus we prayed and labored. At some point the pain ceased and the symptoms seemed to recede. But there was nothing remarkable to decide as that the cancer was in remission. Every day was life and death prayer and life and death labor. We decided to have a day of prayer and fasting. This day was the deciding moment. My family was fully involved. They joined us in the prayers from home. Baba, Mama, and the young Abby, then only 12, prayed in church the whole day. It was natural for us to think that every factor considered, there was no way God was going to refuse to grant us exactly what we asked for. Of course, this is not the right way to believe, but we didn't know better. We refused to give God room to decide anything. And that was the species of faith I had for a very long time. So Victor and I went to a solitary place which was part of the university property. We studied and prayed and studied. The prayers were earnest and with one key request: the healing of Victor to the glory of God's name and the vindication of his helpless servants. In simple faith after prayers, I would ask Victor if there was any change, and there wasn't. Evening was approaching. No change. The last prayer was to be made, and we decided to, as always, first go aside to pray personally before we prayed the last prayer together. With what I've explained to you, you might already guess the deep earnestness with which this prayer was made. It was the attitude that Jacob manifested for a higher blessing. I will not let you go except you bless me. And God granted our will. Whether it was by permission because of our insistence or it was his perfect plan, I can't tell. All I can tell is that God performed a direct miracle. We earnestly insisted on a miraculous intervention, and we received it. We didn't see how any other answer from God could be appropriate in the circumstance. After praying individually, we joined to pray together and then walked from the scene. It was not long on our journey back before I asked Victor if there was any change that he knew anything about. He didn't answer anything, which awakened some fear in me. But I did not want to prod him further, seeing it might hurt him more than disappoint me. When we reached the hostel, he went to the washroom, then came to break the glad news to me. He had been miraculously healed. This was a matter of fact. He later told me that he needed to go to the washroom to confirm what he had already felt, to establish that he was truly experiencing a miracle and not dreaming. The tumor had shrunk, the smell gone, the colored discharge vanished, and he was completely under no pain. He told me that during the last prayers, he had a strong impression, like an audible voice, to touch the area of the swelling, and when he did, he discovered that it had shrunk. But he waited to confirm that the other symptoms had gone too before revealing everything to me. He told me, however, that there was a very negligible swelling that was left. I asked him if we needed to stay longer to handle the vestigial swelling, but he said that from what we had witnessed, the real danger was past. To think that this really small distension left would be any problem felt like ungrateful unbelief. With joy, I quickly joined him in unreserved thanksgiving. What joy and thanksgiving and praise and testimony. We stayed with him in college for a few more days and we enjoyed our time together. He was in perfect health, strong and vibrant. Hardly anyone seeing us together as to whom he was to me. Our features bespoke the same genetic stock. He needed to travel home and go to school. To say that parents were happy and thankful to God is an understatement. My grandmother said that he looked healthier than ever. His skin was mellow, his steps elastic, and his aura sweeter. Every element of perfect health was upon him. It was apparent that the ideal diet and lifestyle that he had been through was not without effect upon him. God had without question given us victory. So Victor went back to school and resumed his normal lifestyle. During one of the church sessions, he gave testimony to what God had done to him. One of the classmates was moved to tears by the account. Inspired by the moment, he immediately composed a deeply inspiring song, which they once sang in my local church. During the holidays, I decided that he comes back to stay with me. At the back of my mind, something still lingered about the vestigial tumor. It seemed to me that God had performed a direct miracle to set the disease in remission, but there was still left some part for us to play concerning the seemingly insignificant vestige. But inspired by Victor's confidence, I feared that these may be sentiments of wicked unbelief. I reasoned that God must be able to perfect what he has begun. This position appeared most plausible. The idea prevailed that he should visit a very friendly aunt who desired to see him after this dramatic experience, but not before I received a word that she would diligently look into his diet. I gave overall prescriptions. Long story short, Victor enjoyed his holidays until one fateful evening when he called me to inform me that there was a relapse. When God chooses to try a man, he leaves no spot upon his soul untried. The heat of the furnace, only the victim can tell. The heart's God knows best. I wept like a baby whenever no one was seeing. So much was at stake. Victor was in physical and psychological pain again. What grievous evil has he done to deserve this? How about the ungodly scoffers who desired an opportunity to say that miracles do not exist, and that it does not really pay for such a young man to deny himself and walk in the narrow way? How will we meet their scorn? And it's true that words were spoken that were calculated to cut deep, and they did. Has the Most High deceived us? We didn't choose this path for ourselves, and it's already straight enough. Why should we suffer so much for choosing the right thing? As the Lord called us from the world only to forsake us on the way. These were the difficult questions upon nearly every moment of my life, until the day that Victor was violently torn from us by death. But the greatest of all questions was, what has Victor done to deserve all the suffering? Evil people live very peacefully and even scoff at us. Why would God then permit such suffering for such an innocent soul? There was a time I was honestly tempted to think that every factor considered, Job's heart was not as closely tried. I used to walk with tear-dimmed eyes to go to the most solitary places of the university to ask God some really difficult questions. After praying long and in tears, I opened my eyes expecting that God would graciously send an angel to perhaps unravel some of these mysteries. None appeared. Then I would pray again until, evidence or no evidence, there was peace in my soul. I always left the place of prayer with perfect peace, but without the physical healing of Victor. Every line in the Bible, and especially the book of Psalms, was really precious in those days. And prayers were disparate but rich. Victor was soon taken for a medical procedure. Of course, not the most violent, but the journey after that was rough and long. Nearly every day of the long months was fresh heat to the furnace. Whenever I met Victor during his sickness, I felt like wailing aloud. What I regret in this journey is that I never relented in my expectation that God would intervene to glorify His name in His servants. This made me to stop short of deliberately preparing Victor for his death. My prayers, even in his presence, were with warm tears and earnest insistence that God should bring him back to health. I think this gave him trouble submitting to God's will to early lay him to rest. We both long entertained the hope that God would bring him back to health. Believing that he would be well, he cited to me the words of Jesus concerning Lazarus. This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God. That is John chapter 11 verse 4. Looking back, I believe he was correct in a way that he didn't then understand. Because though Jesus spoke these enigmatic words, Lazarus eventually died. Nay, he didn't die, but slept. For thus he later referred to Lazarus' death. Lazarus slept to glorify God in his Son by Jesus calling him back to life. And I'm confident that Victor slept to glorify God in his Son, not only concerning the power of his resurrection, but also concerning the grace that Christ has qualified himself to give to his saints to the last. The Bible says that the end of a righteous man is peace. Immediately after Victor's death, I wanted to know exactly how he died, because I was going through my end of semester exams when he was going through his last struggles, and I was not able to be personally around. I closely interrogated my mother, who ministered to him to the last. And she told me that when the conversation ceased to be about his recovery and turned to be about the resurrection of the just, Victor completely changed. At the mention of a simple statement about meeting in glory, Victor responded to Mama, "How come you have encouraged me this much? Why didn't you always say these things?" From that time, his hands pointed upwards and he continued to deteriorate until he breathed his last. It seems to me that God gave charge to his angels concerning him, to reinforce the significance of those simple words of Mama for the sustenance of his faith at death. There is completely no reason for me to think that Victor was not in the right company at his death. To think that he died in Jesus' embrace is to think that he died blissfully. He died with paradise in his soul. God faithfully kept the promise to renew the strength of those who wait for him, and he renewed it to the last. He gave Victor strength as his day. Strength to die. As the long days went by, more tests revealed more organ deterioration. Victor shared with me every detail, and I sounded him to somewhat perceive what was going on in his mind. I never had the privilege to stay with him in the most part, but I seemed to feel every pain he was going through. I asked myself endless questions, especially on human suffering. I always wished God was there to answer. Victor at some point in his suffering sent me a text message of a statement saying, "Heaven will be cheap enough if we obtain it through suffering." These latter parts of the journey had a greater toll on me, though I didn't live with him. I hardly had time to study, but I somehow went through my work as a student. My entire fourth year in the university was spent in this manner. Save for my roommate and for the testimony we made in church after Victor's recovery, I don't think fellow students really knew anything of the burden I was carrying around. I was actually very active in church and had enormous church responsibilities. I'd promised myself, and I think I'd mentioned it before God, that I would not accept Victor's death. But I was surprised that when I was told about it, strange peace dawned upon my soul. I assured myself that Victor was not in pain anymore. Growing up, we used to say that we live in the same compound for life with our families. But I believe that by God's help, I will fight the good fight and meet him in glory, never to part again. Michael Andio, his close friend who had composed the song concerning his miraculous healing, also composed his burial song. I kept a video of it, but it somehow disappeared. I'll share it with you in case I find the video of the song as captured by anyone in any quality. Before I end this video, I would love to say that before Victor died, he was writing a book and he handed me the manuscript so that I could render it for publication. There were lessons he wanted to pass across. The manuscript somehow disappeared. The least I think I can do in service to his legacy is to immortalize this record of a life well lived. And I call the God of heaven to do with the record of his life that which his continued existence itself could not do. Amen. Some precious lessons that I learned during Victor's experience and after his death. Number 1. We will not always understand the mysteries of God's actions presently, but we'll definitely understand later. What I do, thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know hereafter. That is John 13 verse 7. Number 2. God lays his righteous servants sometimes to an early grave to keep them from the evil to come. The righteous perisheth, and no man layeth it to heart. And merciful men are taken away, none considering that the righteous is taken away from the evil to come. That is Isaiah 57 verse 1. Number 3. Death is not a bad thing for the Christian. It is rest in Jesus. Number 4. We are none too young to die. The best way to live is to prepare for death. Number 5. Sometimes it takes the death of a dear one to fortify one's own soul against the fear of death. The cold tomb becomes less repulsive by hiding away a dear one. Number 6. Proverbs chapter 24 verse 20 says, Man's goings are of the Lord. How can a man then understand his own way? The details of your life circumstances are God's exclusive property. That includes for how long you'll be needed here. The only begotten of God was here for only 33 years, and then exited the stage with the victorious words upon his lips, I have finished the work which thou gavest me to do. Life is not a holiday, but a responsibility. We should not seek to live long, but to live well. Number 7. By sinking into self-pity during our trials, we may stop short of sympathetically understanding God's dilemma in the great controversy with evil. Sometimes Satan will be allowed to have his way with God's people, like in the case of Job, for greater good. And I may surprise you that this is not the only profound disappointment I've been personally called to experience in my life. There have been other fiery ones. God has not promised the Christian freedom from suffering. Yes, this world is not the Christian's heaven. Those motivational speakers in the name of preachers are lying to you. Do not believe them. Jesus was the most godly person that there could be, and he suffered the most. And the Bible teaches that we can expect to inherit life only as we are prepared to suffer with him. Refer to Romans chapter 8 verse 17 to 18. What God has promised is grace in trial. In fact, the Bible says that we must through much tribulation enter into the kingdom of God. That is Acts chapter 14 verse 22. A wise man will not choose a partner in prosperity, but in affliction. They should love you for what you are, not what you have or what you give them. That will not be love, but selfishness. If you love Christ just because He gives you prosperity in this life and saves you from hell in the hereafter, then you don't love Christ but yourself. So Christ does choose His bride not in prosperity, but in affliction. He says, "Behold, I have refined thee, but not with silver. I have chosen thee in the furnace of affliction." That is Isaiah chapter 48 verse 10. But let no one refuse to yield their lives to Christ for the fear of suffering. For you will not suffer any more than you'd have otherwise endured in this broken world. Without Christ and without hope in the world, you will literally be in the company of evil men and wicked spirits alone. You will be at their mercies. You can judge how happy that is. Every evil person knows from experience that there is no peace for the wicked. Christ, on the other hand, promises the Christian abiding peace. It is peace that the world cannot give nor take away. It is peace in tribulation. A good man's deathbed is happier than a wicked man's feast. And the wicked spirits that an evil man has chosen for companions in life will prove quite a miserable company upon his deathbed, as they welcome him to the torments of hell and eternal death. Number 8. There are cases in which God will not do exactly what we asked for, and faith must involve trusting Him to know better than us, not insisting on our own way. There are, however, occasions He will agree with us and do exactly as we asked. But all these circumstances, good or seemingly evil, are working together to serve our highest good. Rose flowers are found among thorns, and the thorns will protect the flowers. I've personally had really precious experiences in which God's firm and kind leading has been felt to nurture, to provide, and to protect. And I think this narration will be incomplete without mentioning these beautiful roses among thorns. We can, by God's help, expect these in our future videos. Thanks for being here to this point. The more I give these accounts, the more I get inclined to speak up some more. And it seems to me that common folks like myself may find encouragement in these accounts to help their faith in the upward journey. I encourage you to still stay around. Subscribing to the channels remains to be a wonderful idea. And we think it will be a good idea sharing these videos with those whom you think may be benefited. Ubarikiwe sana.